The summer sun hung high over the fields near Stirling Castle on a warm June afternoon in the year 1314. The air was thick with the tension of two massive armies facing one another across the marshy ground of the Bannockburn. Dust kicked up by thousands of hooves clouded the horizon as the English vanguard approached the Scottish lines. Among the English knights rode Sir Henry De Bohun, a young and impetuous warrior eager for glory. He spotted a lone figure riding a small palfrey, inspecting the Scottish lines. Recognizing the golden crown atop the helmet, De Bohun lowered his lance and spurred his heavy warhorse into a thundering charge. The fate of a nation seemed to hang in the balance of this singular moment of impending violence. The lone rider was none other than King Robert the Bruce of Scotland. He was not mounted on a great destrier, but on a nimble grey pony suited for traversing the boggy terrain. His men watched in frozen horror as the English knight bore down on their king. Bruce did not retreat, nor did he call for aid from his spearmen. Instead, he sat motionless as the ground shook beneath the galloping hooves of the charging charger. At the very last second, just as the lance tip sought his chest, Bruce pulled his mount sharply to the side. Standing in his stirrups, he swung his battle axe with devastating force. The movement was so precise it seemed practiced 1,000 times before. The blow struck De Bohun with such power that it split his helmet and skull in two. The English knight fell dead to the earth before his horse had even halted. A roar erupted from the Scottish ranks as they witnessed their king single-handedly dispatch a fully armored English champion. This moment was not just a feat of personal combat, but a symbol of the defiance that would define the days to come. Bruce returned to his commanders, who chastised him for risking his life so recklessly. The king merely looked at his broken axe shaft and lamented the loss of a good weapon, while the English vanguard recoiled in shock. This dramatic duel marked the opening of the Battle of Bannockburn, a conflict that would decide the future of the Scottish kingdom. For years, the Scots had struggled under the weight of English occupation, initiated by King Edward, known as the Hammer of the Scots. His son King Edward II now sought to crush the rebellion once and for all. He had assembled the largest army ever to leave England, comprising heavy cavalry, archers, and infantry drawn from England, Wales, and Ireland. The sheer scale of the English force was intended to terrify the Scots into submission and relieve the siege of Stirling Castle, the last major Scottish stronghold still in English hands. Stirling Castle stood as the gateway to the Highlands and a strategic prize of immense value. Edward Bruce, the brother of the king, had made a pact with the English constable of the castle, Sir Philip Mowbray. The agreement stated that if the castle was not relieved by Midsummer Day, it would be surrendered to the Scots. This deadline forced King Edward II to march north with haste and engage Robert the Bruce on ground of the Scots' choosing. The English king believed his superior numbers and heavy cavalry would easily sweep aside the smaller Scottish force. However, he underestimated the tactical genius of Robert the Bruce and the resolve of men fighting for their freedom. Robert the Bruce was a man forged in the fires of adversity and betrayal. He had seized the throne in 1306, but faced immediate setbacks and defeats that forced him into hiding. During his time as a fugitive, he learned the value of guerrilla warfare and the importance of terrain. He spent years systematically dismantling English power in Scotland, capturing castles and razing them to the ground to prevent their use by the enemy. By 1314, he had united much of Scotland behind him, but he had never risked a pitched battle against the full might of the English army. Now, with the deadline for Stirling Castle looming, he had no choice but to stand and fight. The Scottish army was vastly outnumbered by the English host. Estimates suggest Bruce commanded around 6,000 infantry and a small force of light cavalry, while Edward II led perhaps 20,000 men, including 2,000 heavy armored knights. The disparity in numbers meant that a direct confrontation on open ground would be suicide for the Scots. Bruce knew he had to use the landscape to neutralize the English advantage. He chose his position carefully at the New Park, a hunting preserve south of Stirling. The area was bordered by the Bannockburn and protected by marshes and soft ground that would hamper the heavy English horses. To further strengthen his position, Bruce ordered his men to dig hundreds of small pits, known as pots, along the likely avenues of English attack. These pits were knee-deep and concealed with branches and turf, intended to break the legs of charging horses. He organized his infantry into schiltrons, which were massive circular formations of spearmen bristling with 12-foot pikes. These mobile hedgehogs of steel were capable of repelling cavalry charges from any direction. Bruce drilled his men, relentlessly ensuring they could move and maneuver these formations with discipline and precision. He was preparing a trap that would turn the English strength into their greatest weakness. As the English army arrived on the 23rd of June, they found the Scots waiting in the woods of the new park. The English vanguard, led by the Earl of Gloucester and the Earl of Hereford, was eager to engage immediately. They believed the Scots would flee at the first sight of their banners. It was during this initial chaotic approach that the duel between Bruce and De Bohun took place. The death of their champion dampened the spirits of the English vanguard, but did not stop their advance. A separate English cavalry force under Sir Robert Clifford attempted to bypass the Scottish position and reach Stirling Castle directly. Seeing Clifford maneuver his troops toward the castle, Robert the Bruce turned to his nephew Thomas Randolph, the Earl of Moray. He rebuked him, saying that a rose had fallen from his chaplet, meaning he had let the enemy pass. Stung by the criticism, Randolph led his schiltron out of the woods to intercept the English cavalry. On the open plain, the Scottish spearmen formed a tight circle as the English knights thundered toward them. The ground shook as hundreds of horses charged, but the wall of spears held firm. The knights circled the schiltron looking for a weakness, but found only a bristling forest of steel points. The skirmish between Randolph and Clifford was a brutal test of the schiltron tactic. Without archer support, the English cavalry could not break the formation. Horses were impaled on pikes and knights were pulled from their saddles and bludgeoned on the ground. Frustrated and taking heavy casualties, the English eventually broke off the attack and retreated. This second victory on the first day of battle further bolstered Scottish morale. The common soldiers began to believe that they could stand against the might of English chivalry. As night fell, the English army camped on the damp carse of Balquhidderrock, a low-lying marshy area between the Bannockburn and the River Forth. The mood in the English camp that night was somber and rife with discord. The soldiers were tired from the long march and demoralized by the day's events. They spent a miserable night in the mud, wary of a Scottish night attack. In contrast, the Scots were jubilant, but Bruce remained cautious. He knew the main battle was yet to come. He addressed his troops, reminding them of the atrocities committed by the English and the freedom that awaited them if they won. He offered any man who did not wish to fight the chance to leave, but a great shout went up from the ranks affirming their loyalty. At dawn on the 24th of June, the English army began to move across the Bannockburn. King Edward II was confident that his archers and heavy cavalry would crush the Scots in a conventional battle. However, the narrow front of the battlefield meant the English could not deploy their full numbers. Their massive army was crammed into a confined space, causing confusion and delay. As the English struggled to form their lines, the Scottish army did something unexpected. Instead of remaining in the defensive cover of the woods, the schiltrons emerged onto the open plain and knelt in prayer. King Edward II, watching from a distance, mistook this act of piety for submission. He reportedly exclaimed that they were asking for mercy. One of his attendants corrected him, saying they ask for mercy, but from God, not from you. The English king ordered his vanguard to charge. The Earl of Gloucester, eager to redeem his honor after a dispute with the king the previous night, led the attack without waiting for support. He spurred his horse forward into the forest of Scottish spears. The collision was horrific, with the sound of breaking lances and screaming horses echoing across the field. The Earl of Gloucester was killed, almost instantly impaled on the Scottish pikes. His death sent a shockwave through the English ranks. The heavy cavalry charge, which had dominated European battlefields for centuries, was stopped dead in its tracks. The Scottish schiltrons did not break. Instead, they began to advance. Step by step, the walls of spears pushed forward, driving the English cavalry back into their own infantry. The confined space became a slaughterhouse where the English superior numbers worked against them. Men were crushed by their own comrades and horses panicked in the press. Bruce observed the battle closely from his position in the rear. He saw that the English archers were beginning to deploy on the flanks, raining arrows down on the Scottish spearmen. This was the greatest threat to the schiltrons, as the unarmored Scots were vulnerable to the longbow. Bruce had anticipated this danger. He signaled to Sir Robert Keith, the Marshal of Scotland, who commanded a small force of light cavalry. Keith led his horsemen in a sweeping charge around the flank, crashing into the English archers. The bowmen, having no defensive weapons and no protection, were scattered and cut down. With the threat of the archers removed, the Scottish schiltrons continued their relentless advance. The three main Scottish divisions, commanded by Edward Bruce, Thomas Randolph, and James Douglas, fought side by side, compressing the English army into an ever-shrinking space. The English knights, trapped between the advancing spears and the Bannockburn, could not maneuver. They were pulled from their horses and finished off with axes and daggers. The ground became slick with blood and the air filled with the screams of the dying. The vaunted English chivalry was being systematically destroyed by Scottish commoners. King Edward II watched in horror as his army disintegrated before his eyes. The English rearguard could not engage because the way was blocked by their own retreating vanguard. Panic began to spread through the ranks. It was at this critical moment that a fresh body of men appeared on the Gillies Hill behind the Scottish lines. This group, known as the Sma folk, consisted of camp followers, servants, and townsfolk who had fashioned homemade weapons and banners. To the desperate English eyes, they looked like a fresh Scottish army arriving to join the slaughter. The sight of these reinforcements broke the English resolve completely. Cries of defeat rang out and the English line collapsed. Thousands of men turned and fled toward the Bannockburn, desperate to escape the advancing wall of spears. The steep banks of the burn became a death trap. Men and horses tumbled into the water, drowning in their heavy armor or being trampled by those following behind. The chroniclers say the burn was so choked with bodies that a man could cross it dry shod. The rout was absolute and the carnage was terrible. King Edward II was escorted from the field by his personal bodyguard. He initially tried to seek refuge in Stirling Castle, but Sir Philip Mowbray refused him entry. Mowbray knew the castle would soon surrender, and he could not guarantee the king's safety. Edward was forced to flee south, pursued by Sir James Douglas and a small troop of horsemen. The chase was relentless, with Douglas harrying the king's party all the way to Dunbar. From there, Edward took a ship back to England, leaving his army to its fate. It was a humiliating escape for a king who had arrived with such arrogance. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of immense destruction and immense wealth. The Scots captured the English baggage train, which contained vast treasures including gold, silver, and military equipment. The ransom payments for the captured English nobles would enrich the Scottish kingdom for years to come. But the true value of the victory lay not in gold, but in legitimacy. Robert the Bruce had proved himself a master tactician and a true king. He had defeated the greatest army in Christendom and secured his hold on the Scottish throne. The victory at Bannockburn did not end the war immediately, but it was the turning point. It ended the possibility of English conquest and firmly established an independent Scotland. The English would not mount another major invasion for years. Bruce used the momentum to launch raids into northern England, forcing Edward II to pay for peace. The battle also unified the Scottish people. The nobles who had previously opposed Bruce or remained neutral now flocked to his banner. The Declaration of Arbroath, written 6 years later, would famously articulate the Scottish desire for freedom. This famous document, sent to the Pope, asserted that as long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It was a bold statement of national identity forged in the blood of Bannockburn. The battle demonstrated that a disciplined army of infantry fighting for a cause could defeat superior numbers of heavy cavalry. It changed the perception of warfare in Europe and signaled the decline of the knightly dominance. The tactics used by Bruce would be studied and emulated by future generations. The legacy of Bannockburn endures to this day as a defining moment in Scottish history. The site of the battle is marked by a monument and a statue of Robert the Bruce mounted on his warhorse axe in hand. It remains a place of pilgrimage for those who cherish the story of the underdog triumphing against overwhelming odds. The landscape has changed over the centuries, but the spirit of that day lingers in the misty fields near Stirling. The story of the small folk, the schiltrons, and the king who fought for his people continues to inspire. Robert the Bruce is remembered not just as a warrior, but as a statesman who understood that military victory must be followed by political consolidation. He worked tirelessly to gain international recognition for Scotland's independence. In 1328, 14 years after the battle, the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton was signed. In this treaty, the English crown finally recognized Robert the Bruce as King of Scots and Scotland as an independent nation. The long struggle that had begun with the execution of William Wallace had finally achieved its goal. The Battle of Bannockburn also highlighted the importance of leadership and morale in medieval warfare. Bruce's ability to inspire his men to maintain discipline and to execute complex maneuvers under pressure was the key to his success. In contrast, Edward II's lack of military experience and his inability to control his nobles led to disaster. The English army, though large and well-equipped, lacked the cohesion and the singular purpose of the Scots. It was a classic example of quality overcoming quantity and strategy defeating brute force. The role of the terrain cannot be overstated. Bruce chose the battlefield, perfectly forcing the English to fight on his terms. The marshes, the woods, and the pots neutralized the English cavalry and funneled their attack into a kill zone. It was a masterclass in defensive positioning turned into an offensive rout. The Scots knew every inch of the ground and used it to their advantage, while the English were fighting in unfamiliar and hostile territory. The land itself seemed to fight for the Scots, trapping the invaders in mud and water. The casualties at Bannockburn were heavily lopsided. While the Scots suffered relatively light losses, the English dead numbered in the thousands. Many noble families in England lost fathers and sons on that field. The Earl of Gloucester, the Earl of Hereford, and countless other knights perished or were captured. The psychological impact on England was profound. The invincible image of the English war machine was shattered. For decades afterwards, the English feared the Scots and were reluctant to engage them in open battle. Among the Scottish heroes, Sir James Douglas, known as the Black Douglas, cemented his reputation as a fearsome warrior. His pursuit of Edward II became legendary. Thomas Randolph, the Earl of Moray, also proved his worth, leading his schiltron with immense bravery. These men, along with Edward Bruce, formed the core of a loyal and capable leadership that supported the king. Their unity stands in stark contrast to the infighting and jealousy that plagued the English command. The brotherhood of the Scottish leaders was a crucial factor in their victory. The common soldiers of Scotland, the spearmen and the archers, deserve equal praise. They stood their ground against the most terrifying weapon of the age, the armored knight charge. To stand firm while tons of horse and steel thunder towards you requires nerves of steel. Their discipline in the schiltron formation was the rock upon which the English wave broke. They were fighting for their homes, their families, and their right to live free from foreign domination. Their courage is the true heart of the Bannockburn story. As the years passed, the story of Bannockburn became woven into the fabric of Scottish culture. Songs and poems were written to celebrate the victory. It became a symbol of resilience and national pride. Even in times of later defeat and union with England, the memory of Bannockburn served as a reminder of what the Scots could achieve when united. It is a story that transcends borders, resonating with anyone who values freedom and self-determination. The image of the Bruce standing tall against the English host is iconic. Historians continue to study the battle, debating the exact location and the precise numbers involved. However, the outcome and its significance are beyond dispute. It was the climax of the First War of Scottish Independence. It secured the Bruce dynasty and ensured the survival of a separate Scottish legal and religious identity. Without Bannockburn, the history of the British Isles would have been vastly different. Scotland might have been absorbed completely into England, losing its distinct character forever. The tactical innovations of Bannockburn also foreshadowed the changes in warfare that would occur during the 100 Years' War. The dominance of infantry over cavalry would be seen again at battles like Crecy and Agincourt. Bruce showed that knights were not invincible and that well-led foot soldiers could dictate the flow of battle. He was a visionary commander who adapted to the changing realities of war. His legacy is that of a military genius who saved his nation from extinction. Today, visitors to the battlefield can walk the ground where these events took place. The Visitor Center tells the story of the battle through immersive exhibits and 3D technology. Standing near the borestone where Bruce is said to have raised his standard, one can almost hear the clash of steel and the roar of the armies. It is a place of reflection and remembrance. The monument serves as a permanent tribute to the men who fought and died there on those 2 fateful days in June. The victory was not just for the nobles, but for the whole of Scotland. The participation of the Sma folk showed that the war was a people's war. The freedom won at Bannockburn was a collective achievement. It gave the Scottish people a sense of ownership over their destiny. The social structure of Scotland was strengthened by the shared sacrifice of the battle. It was a unifying event that brought together highborn and lowborn in a common cause. As the sun set on the second day of the battle, the carnage was finally over. The English army was scattered, the king had fled, and the field belonged to the Scots. The silence that followed the slaughter was heavy with the cost of victory. But as the survivors looked upon the ruin of the English army, they knew that they had achieved the impossible. They had broken the chains of oppression. The Battle of Bannockburn was won and Scotland was free. The journey of Robert the Bruce from a landless fugitive to the victor of Bannockburn is one of the greatest comebacks in history. It is a testament to perseverance and belief. He never gave up even when all seemed lost. His leadership at Bannockburn was the culmination of a life spent fighting for his right to rule and his people's right to exist. He remains one of Scotland's greatest heroes, a king who truly earned his crown. In the end, the Battle of Bannockburn serves as a powerful reminder of the cost of freedom. It was bought with blood and courage on a muddy field in Stirlingshire. The victory secured the independence of a nation and shaped the identity of a people for centuries to come. As long as history is told, the name of Bannockburn will echo through the ages as a symbol of resistance and the unyielding desire for liberty.